Happy New Year, everyone. Good evening, ICIFA members, our distinguished guests. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. That is the first webinar of the year, and we are very delighted that we are going to focus on a topic that is important to the vision of the Institute on the matter of ethics. Thank you once again for joining us. So we'll just go straight to the program. We'll begin with a presentation by Mr. Kevin Moore, who is the Director of Global Business Development at CISI. And as you're aware, CISI is an important partner with the ICIFA, and we are happy that we are collaborating regarding matters integrity and ethics, and is going to take us through the presentation on integrity at work. So as we move along, we'll have some dilemmas that will challenge you. We'll launch polls. We want this to be as interactive as possible and for us to gain some perspectives out of this webinar. So welcome, Kevin. And as I will conclude, we'll now introduce the other speakers after your presentation. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Diana. Are the slides going to be pulled up? I've got a presentation. Try and share it on my end.
Yeah, they will.
There we go. Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Well, absolutely, it's a delight to be part of the presentation jointly with ICIFA. It's funny, we also talked about integrity and did very much a joint event. It's very interesting to me to hear a Kenyan perspective on everything. When we celebrated the signing of the agreement between CISI and ICIFA. So it is quite appropriate at the beginning of a new year because, integrity is a topic, it's never going to get old. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world, global pandemics, changes of US president, whatever. Bottom line is that, integrity, the way we behave, is always going to be critical. It doesn't matter on the development technology, new working practices, everything. Bottom line is we're people and we need to remember the importance of behaving correctly. So if I could have the next slide. Yeah, I won't spend too long on this. I mean, all professional bodies, funny enough, I was doing a presentation this morning and we looked at about 8 different professional bodies and their mission statements and everybody, there was a common theme around integrity. And I know, just how important it is, for ICIFA and for its members, as Diana said. So next slide, please. Yeah, I think this is where you start to think about where does it fit, knowledge, skills, and behavior. In my career, I'm a former banker. 21 years I worked for Lloyds Bank, and then and about 10 of those years I was in wealth management. So I was, much closer to the sort of the investment side. But I'll be honest, most of the training I received through my 21-year career focused on knowledge and skills. Lloyds was an excellent employer in that respect. I joined as a graduate from university. There were very organized training programs to teach me, all about banking, and I took banking exams. And I later took CISI's investment-related exams when I moved into wealth management. So Lloyds was very keen on making sure you had the right knowledge to do your job. And there was lots of skills training as well. How to interview. We were videoed doing practice interviews and giving feedback on how we handled things. How did you negotiate? All of these things, all of these skills that are necessary to be a professional, to do your job well. But the one topic that was, blindingly, obviously missing was we never really discussed behavior. And I didn't really think about it because, of course, I think everybody up to the time of the financial crisis, maybe, almost took behavior for granted. That it was banking and finance as a profession more generally was seen as an honorable profession. Most people in it were decent people. And I'm sure that's still the case, but nevertheless, the financial crisis pretty much changed opinions in parts of the world. I mean, in the UK, banking, and let's be honest, financial services, the public, I don't think differentiate too much between, say, bankers and investment specialists or private bankers and people, in a compliance team. You're working in financial services, and the financial services, profession, will be looked at by many people as just one big profession, despite the fact that we all know there's many different parts to that profession. But suddenly finance went from an area that you could be quite proud of joining to one where actually it was almost a cause of embarrassment. That if you said, "Oh, I work in finance," it was seen perhaps as greedy, as people who'd let down, the world in a way. The big banks in particular, had put the world on the edge of an economic precipice through, bad behavior. And suddenly the spotlight was shone on integrity, and suddenly integrity became a big issue. So for the CISI, I joined it around the time of the financial crisis, and it went from, something that we were doing a little bit of work about to something that was becoming, all-consuming. That suddenly this presentation and others like it were, was once a week instead of maybe once or twice a year. So behavior, and I'm really glad that behavior is on the agenda, and it's brilliant that it's been chosen to launch your 2021 program at ICIFA. Next slide. Yeah, a couple of quotations. I'm sure Diana might smile because I remember at the launch that she actually said this, that she used this one. So I've got in early with the quotation this year. That the danger really of not having integrity from the, arguably the ultimate capitalist in the sense of somebody, who's an unashamed businessman. And the reason I like this slide is that sometimes I think people think about, integrity, behavior, ethics. I know that's something we might look at. Is there a difference between integrity and ethics? We might look at later. But sometimes I think people think, well, that's the ideal world behavior. That yes, but in the real world, you have to do things that, that might not qualify as having integrity, but they're necessary. Well, I think when you've got someone like Warren Buffett, putting integrity, stating it as such an important thing, then you need to think, well, hang on, he's not saying that to be, nicey nice or to, he's saying it because it's got economic consequences, commercial consequences. If you've got people in organizations who have not got integrity, who do not do the right thing. So in other words, there's good business reasons for doing this, as well as, frankly, the other virtues of feeling you're doing the right thing and being happy about that. It's actually just commercially sensible. So next slide, please. Here's Christine Lagarde. And again, I think one of the things that I found really interesting, since getting involved in this topic when I joined the CISI, is that, yes, you can intellectualize ethics, and you can, there's lots of big weighty books that you could work through, and you could even go back to the philosophers and look at Plato and others and see what they have to say, about the nature of human behavior. But it really is actually pretty straightforward, and there's lots of ways you can sort of express that. And I think the way that Christine Lagarde here does, by saying it just means doing the right thing, even when nobody is watching. That you're not doing it just because you're worried that someone's going to see you doing something that isn't right and that might have consequences. That you just do it because it's the right thing. And again, that's, I think, when we start to talk about how does that have a day-to-day application for all of us working in the investment world or whatever, well, it's to remind yourself that your conscience should be perched on your shoulder watching you, and remind yourself that it is as simple as doing the right thing. And if your instincts start to tell you that you're not doing the right thing, then stop and think and maybe do something differently. Next one. Should be a graphic for this. Click again. Yeah. I mean, this has been a big question. I mean, let's go to Donald Trump in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen. The whole question of who can you trust has become a big issue. I think, historically, you might well have thought that certainly when the president of the US was making public pronouncements, that you would rely on them being as correct as any politicians. I mean, let's be honest. We all know that politicians have to spin things. They have to put a complexion on things. But in terms of just telling something that is untrue, then that's become a big question, for the US to answer. And then you've got, do you get the truth off social media? I mean, the phrase fake news, I'd never heard that, until the last few years. And you get things like confirmation bias coming in, where if you get your news off social media and you're being told everything by your friends who think the same way you do, then, you're not necessarily, you might trust your friends, but you're not necessarily getting a balanced view of what's happening. So actually, the who do you trust question is quite a difficult one. And it's going to differ around the world. So if we have a look at the next slide. Yeah, I mean, you know, you will have your own view on this from a Kenyan perspective. This is a sort of a global poll, but I know from experience that sometimes I've shown it and people will look at individual lines there and say, well, not necessarily here. But, you know, I think particularly at the moment with the pandemic, then, you know, I suspect that doctors and nurses are still, you know, highly trusted. Certainly, you know, from a UK perspective, the gratitude that the nation feels towards those people that have put themselves right in harm's way to help people in the last sort of 12 months, and it's going to continue, you know, has probably raised the respect for doctors and nurses. So, you know, I'm not surprised to see them top of the tree in terms of the sorts of people that you trust. Teachers as well. You know, I mean, again, a profession where, you know, many of us will look back fondly and remember teachers that have helped us. You know, I can even now still remember those teachers whose lessons I still benefit from even now, you know, more than 40 years since I left school. Judges and then down. Then you've got the person in the street. But you've got to sort of work your way down. Now, again, bankers, there's that line, 44%. It's actually climbed. And bankers is, again, let's just take it as generic code for people in financial services. But, you know, when you think that finance is a trust business, I didn't use another slide today that I sometimes do, where JP Morgan, the founder of the bank, you know, when asked the question about, you know, what is the foundation of finance, replied trust. You know, when you think about that, if banking and finance and investment is based on trust, then it's not good to see, you know, bankers still relatively low down. Although, as I say, funnily enough, they gently climbed up the league table a little bit in the last few years. So trust, you know, I think is gradually being restored post financial crisis, but you know, still got a long way to go. And when you think about trust, is so important. I mean, if any of you, you know, working in investment, were trying to encourage me to invest in your funds, in your portfolios, then, you know, I'm not going to know if it was a good decision, perhaps until many years later. You know, I'm going to have to trust you when you tell me that this portfolio is going to deliver, you know, X and Y, and that, you know, and you're honest and you explain how, you know, it might go up and down in value, but longer term, you know, this is what you would be hoping to achieve. I'm trusting you to be able to deliver that. I'm trusting you to be telling me the right thing. I can't see it. I can't road test it. I can perhaps have a look at past performance, but as we all know, past performance is not necessarily an indicator of future performance. So, it really is a trust business. The world of investment, the world of securities, you know, and the world of finance. You generally don't see what you're getting, and you can't kick it or test it. So, you know, I think we've still got a long way to go. But, you know, frankly, the fact that we're having this discussion, and the fact that it's not the first time, and the fact that it's such an important thing for professional bodies like ICIFA and the CISI and others, and indeed large organizations, you know, let's hope that over the years, bankers will climb up that table and you know, achieve a higher level of trust. Next one, please. Yeah, I mean, you know, if the good news was it's climbing, financial services, I can't see the bottom of the screen, but it's still the lowest, you know, the lowest in terms of trust compared to some other industry sectors. So we've got you know, as I say, financial services has a long way to go. I sometimes, when I'm doing this presentation, particularly to younger groups, you know, say to them that they've got the challenge, frankly, because it's not going to be quick. I don't think you suddenly restore trust. You know, that doesn't work in personal life. You know, if you betray somebody's trust, you might never get it back, and even if you do, it might always be different than the trust that existed before you broke it. And I think you know, financial services and the businesses in it are going to have to consistently demonstrate that they are placing, say, for example, the client's interests, you know, at the very top of the priorities, and that their own remuneration, their own profits, you know, they're important. Everybody knows, you know, that organizations are in business to generate profits, even a not-for-profit like the CISI. But nevertheless, you know, there's a way to do it properly, and there's a way to do it badly. And the way to do it badly isn't sustainable. You know, if any of you as giving advice, or any of you, you know, dealing with customers, if you develop a reputation for being untrustworthy, or perhaps being, you know, very good with words and being able to persuade people to do things, but actually at the end, you don't deliver or what you've promised, then it's very quick, I think, to be seen as untrustworthy, and very quick, therefore, to be damaging to you and your business. So next one, please. And of course, it's not just financial services. Sometimes spend a bit longer on this, but I'm very conscious that we've got an eminent panel, and we want to look at some scenarios and get everybody more involved. But there's just a couple of examples there. You might recognize Lance Armstrong. I mean, down there. I mean, Lance Armstrong's interesting. At one point, absolutely, held up as, excuse me, a really great example of almost the ultimate sportsman. Hugely successful. Winning the Tour de France and other races around the world. Consistently over many years. That he'd battled, with cancer and overcome, personal difficulty like that. That also, he was giving money to charity, had a large foundation. And, so in many ways, you'd have sort of thought that's, absolutely commendable. And then suddenly, the news starts to leak out, and then it comes out that, he's been doping, as have many in that sport. And, the whole facade unravels. And he goes from being, somebody that you could respect for all those things to somebody that, really has perhaps arguably cheated his way to the top. And used artificial stimulants to stay at the top. And indeed, I watched a documentary that really alleged that also, he dragged other people into his criminality. So it taints the whole thing, which is sad because there's many good things that he's done, but that lack of integrity, undermines everything. Volkswagen. I mean, you remember a few years ago, still rumbling on now, the after effects, of the emissions scandal, where it was revealed that Volkswagen were deliberately overstating the eco-friendliness of their engines in order to meet US requirements, and once it came out, suddenly a brand that I would have probably thought was one of the world's most trustworthy, German, reliable, highly functional, been around for many years, and suddenly, you think, well, hang on, they lied, straightforwardly lied, and it's, in that company, it's resulted in, huge fines, damage to the reputation, and even, I think, the, criminal action taken against the chief executive. And it probably, when you think about it, probably was one of these things that maybe started off fairly small, just a few people, thinking, well, we'll just exaggerate the results maybe whilst we sort out the science and improve them genuinely, but it unravels quickly. And Petrobras, I'm sure you will all know about that, one of the largest sort of bribery scandals in the world. So next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, we won't spend too long on these, as I say. I do commend any of you that are interested to just look, just Google Edelman Trust, and there's lots of information there that you can get. But it's interesting to see that business is actually generally regarded as competent and ethical. But you get in this case government, and let's call this a UK one. I'm not insulting anyone else's government, but the government can be both not that competent and not that ethical. But business is the only one that makes it into the the sort of perfect zone of being competent and ethical. The media, perhaps marginally ethical, but not so competent. It's an interesting, it's almost a talk in itself, that data. So I commend it to any of you that are interested. Have a quick look at Edelman. Not now, after the, obviously after the event. Next slide, please. Yeah, and again, I won't spend too long on these. I mean, the heading says it all. That people often trust, their own, their own employer is somebody that they trust. You see there, you can spot Kenya sandwiched between Brazil and Saudi Arabia, and that +5 means that actually trust has risen over the period of the survey. Whereas actually, if you look at the UK, so Kenya has gone up 5, UK has gone down 6 in terms of the trust that employees have in their employer. But even so, the average sort of trust level is actually quite respectable. It's interesting. And again, it's one to have a look at if you're because it's probably going to book in itself. Next one. and we'll move on. I think with this, what I think it shows is that you know your own employer, so you're more likely maybe to sort of to understand their motivation and to trust them. And that businesses are straightforward in a way. Everybody knows businesses are there to make money and to deliver a service, and that I think people realize that if they don't deliver the service, or they do something very bad and untrustworthy, they'll probably go out of business. So there's a sort of logic to seeing trust in business increasing, but it's not everywhere. There you go, Kenya still increasing. So UK going down again. So you're definitely outscoring the UK amongst many other countries at the moment. Next one. Yeah, I mean, this is really just to give a UK or FCA perspective. There's a big piece of work going on at the moment around purpose, and I think that's a relevant topic for why are financial services businesses, why do they exist, and not just sort of ticking the boxes and saying, well, to deliver a service or to make money or whatever, but what are the larger, is there a larger vision about why businesses are there? Is there a public good? And definitely, I just watched earlier. I just watched the little video on the CMA website, which is really good, because it just shows that the regulator trying to draw the link between the public benefits of a well-regulated capital market, in terms of the actual effect that can have on frankly ordinary people. As well as obviously providing employment and careers and everything for people in financial services. But the mere fact that you're tapping into capital, you're enabling infrastructure programs to drive ahead. You're in emerging markets, you're reducing the reliance on international businesses that may provide funding, but will certainly want their return in exchange for that. So I think that there is an obvious purpose behind financial services, but I'm not sure it's always had enough prominence. And if it had more prominence, that might then draw the link to ethical behavior. So, it's the FCA now, but I'm sure that other regulators are already doing it, and I'm sure other regulators will continue to look at this. Next one, please. Yeah, I won't spend too long on the CISI Code of Conduct. The bit that, for the dilemma, we're going to move on to the dilemma now, and then we'll be looking at the other dilemmas with the panel. But the words I want you to remember actually are sort of tucked away, hidden in some of this. I want you to think about being honest, open, transparent, and fair. Those words might not be exactly replicated in everybody's code of conduct, but the principles will be. Honesty, that means pretty much the same thing the world over. Being open and transparent, and fairness. There being a balance to the decision you're making, to the consequences of the decision that you're making. If you're winning everything and the other person's losing everything, then it might well, not be a balanced or might not be the right thing to do. So we'll look at a scenario now, but I want you to remember honest, open, transparent, and fair. Next slide, please. But it wouldn't be fair, having stolen the other quotation from Diana. I thought I'd throw one in that just shows how much I know that this whole subject of integrity and professionalism and good behaviour matters to ICIFA. So you can hold that one in your mind as ICIFA members before we go into all the scenarios. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this is a dilemma. I'll have the next slide, and then I'll just talk through the story, and then you'll all be able to vote. So you're starting off fairly high today in terms of job role. You're the chairman. There may well be some chairmen in the audience, but for the rest of you, it's a promotion. So you're the chairman of a firm of fund managers, and you employ somebody called Brian. Brian's one of your best fund managers, and he's worked with you for a long time, and he's done such a great job that you would like to invite Brian to join the board of directors as a reward for successful and long service. So the documents have been put together for the board meeting, and the other directors will have to confirm Brian's promotion. So they've all been sent out the documentation in advance of the board meeting, and tucked away in the documents is Brian's original CV from when he first joined you back in the 80s. But Interestingly, you get a phone call from one of the non-executive directors who contacts you, and let's just pretend that it's me, Kevin. So contacts me and says, Kevin, I've just looked through the papers for the board meeting tomorrow, and of course I know Brian, and but I didn't realise that until I read his CV that he says he's got a degree, because I was at university with Brian, and I don't think that he graduated. I'm pretty certain that Brian left university without finishing his degree. I can't remember the details, but I don't think he actually did graduate, and yet his CV clearly says that he did. Now, your business, your firm is launching a new fund. Brian is one of the key fund managers behind that fund, and all over your marketing literature, it's got, let's call him Brian Poole BSc. So your marketing literature says he's a graduate. His CV says he's a graduate. But when you call Brian and say, Brian, I've just had a interesting call with one of the non-exec directors, and he doesn't think that you actually hold the degree that you say you do. Brian confesses that it's true, that tragically his mother died just before he was due to take his final exams, and he had to go home. His family was in a mess. His father couldn't cope with the situation. So Brian had to step up and effectively take over and run the family. And by the time he'd managed to get everything sort of back on an even keel, it was too late. The finals were over, and he needed to go out and earn money to help support his younger siblings. So, he effectively lied on his CV and got the job. So you now know that he is not Brian Poole BSc. He is just Brian. So have the next slide. So you're going to have 4 options to choose here when you vote. So what are you going to do? You're the boss, you're the chairman. What are you going to do now you know that Brian is not a graduate? Hang on, sorry, back to the other slide. Yeah, thank you. You're not going to worry. So option A, don't worry too much. Is it that important? It's a long time ago. So you're still going to make Brian a director. You're going to obviously have to remove the reference to his degree in the advertising, but you're going to continue with the launch. So it's still congratulations, Brian. Join us on the board. Option B, well, you're not that happy about what Brian has done. You tell Brian, I'm sorry, Brian, but in the circumstances, certainly for the moment, there's no question of us promoting you to the board. You're going to have to remove the reference to his degree in the advertising. But you still employ him. He's still going to be the fund manager. And in fact, you say to him, Brian, why don't you make a donation to charity to sort of show that you're sorry for what you've done? So option A, congratulations, he's still a director. Option B, he keeps his job. Option C starts to go a bit more badly for Brian now. If you're choosing C, it's, well, Brian, I'm sorry, but in the circumstances, I'm going to have to ask you to resign. So you give him the option of leaving on his own choice. And option D, you say, I'm really sorry, Brian, but I'm getting HR involved, and because I think this is the sort of offence for which you could be dismissed. So you get HR and you consider the options in terms of sacking Brian. So A and B, Brian keeps his job. In A, he's still a director. B, keeps his job. C, he's allowed to resign. Or D, he's sacked. So fairly wide spread of options for how things turn out for Brian. When you're voting, remember, would your decision stand up against honest, open, transparent, and fair? Would those be the words that you would be able to use about the option that you choose? Now, I don't know if someone's going to handle allow you the polling options now. So you've got the options up in front of you now, I think. So have a think, honest, open, transparent, and fair. If you're all in the room, I'd be encouraging everyone to have a chat, but that's more difficult nowadays. So when we've got the results of the ICIFA jury in, we can see what's going to happen to Brian. Has everybody voted yet?
Yeah, I hope you're all voting. Please vote. We'll launch the results.
I should we have a quiz in the UK where they have a countdown clock at the end and it sort of goes, This is the other disadvantage, isn't it? If you're in a room, you can look at people and look in their eyes and say, come on, vote. You know, difficult now when everyone's in their home or their offices or by themselves. Usually this is the point when I would be sort of wandering around saying, come on, you voted, haven't you? Yeah.
So Kevin, I can see a couple of members, they're requesting for the full question again. So
I'll run through the
in terms of the characters. So what we can do, we can have the question again. We are at 70%. In case there are some members who have an issue, who have not really understood the question.
Well, I can talk it through again. I mean, essentially, you want to promote Brian. He's worked for your company, for your firm, for your investment firm for a long time and done a great job. But when you go through the formalities, it's revealed that Brian lied on his original job application because when he joined you, he said he had a degree, but he didn't. He went to university, but he didn't finish the degree, so he's not a degree holder. So you found this out sort of by accident, just before you were about to promote him. And he has a good reason. His mother died, his university time was disrupted. But nevertheless, you know, he lied on his CV and he's never told the truth since. So you've now got the options of, do you still make him a director? Do you still promote him? Do you not promote him, but still keep him in your business? So option A, you promote him, carry on just as before. Option B, then you say, well, Brian, not going to make you a director, but you can keep your job. Option C, ask him to resign. Option D, sack him. So, and you've got to think in terms of honesty, openness, transparency, and fairness. So which way are you going to go? Is Brian keeping his job? Is it congratulations, Brian, or bye-bye, Brian? I hope that helps. Oh, hang on, I can now. Yeah, so I can see plainly that nobody, might be one person depending on the percentages, but you know, there's a very small percentage. 4% says, yep, they're going to still promote Brian. 18% saying that they'll still keep him in the company. So only 22% are still keeping Brian. So, and the vast majority, the biggest number, are actually asking him to resign, but most people, you know, well over 70% are saying goodbye. And I'll briefly summarize. Usually we could have a big discussion, but I want to get to the other bits. When you think about it, has Brian been honest? I'd say no. So he's failed the honesty test. Has he been open or transparent? No. You know, he's only confessed to this when he was caught. I think Brian could have confessed to this years before. So his own behavior has not been honest and open. And fairness, well, it's a very sad situation, but you know, for those of you that have worked hard to get your degrees, it's pretty unfair if somebody else can just lie their way to getting a degree. So it's difficult to argue his behavior has been fair. Now, in terms of, you know, the implications for your business, you know, he's a very good fund manager. So on one level, you'd say, well, hang on, why do I want to lose a good fund manager? On the other hand, if you want your business to really demonstrate that being honest and behaving with integrity matters, then it's difficult to ignore this behavior. And you know, what if he'd lied about his professional qualifications? You know, and you found out later that he was not, you know, he didn't have. I know that we've got, you know, CFA holders, CISI exam holders, ICIFA exam holders. So, you know, if people lied about having those, and you relied on their, you know, those exams as a demonstration of somebody's professional competence, then you know, it's a difficult situation to be in, and customers might not have confidence that you really did take trust and integrity seriously. So I would definitely be down with you know, with those people voting to say bye-bye, Brian. And if we very quickly, in fact, to move on, we don't need to look at the rest of the slides, to be honest. The rest of the slides, the CISI's Integrity Committee would agree with the vast majority of the audience here. They would be saying goodbye to Brian because, there's a breakdown in integrity and behavior here. So, it's difficult to see, how you'd keep him. I think the Integrity Committee would agree with those people, the majority who are saying resign, because on one level, he's not necessarily a bad person. Brian's, might well be a good person who made a mistake. So you don't necessarily want to kill off his whole career, but you do need to make a point. So we can, I don't need the slides anymore. I've sort of summarized so that we can move to the panel discussion. So, as I say, unsurprisingly, bearing in mind that this is an audience of ICIFA members, the vast majority of people would be eligible to join the CISI's Integrity Committee and look at these situations. But there's the whole point about integrity, it's often not easy to find exactly the right answer. No one agreed there on one single answer. And I think that's another lesson to take into the workplace, that it's not straightforward and you can't always assume that what you think is what everybody else thinks. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. A virtual round of applause for an insightful presentation. And I thought I saw someone familiar on your slides. Thanks for that.
Exactly. I hope you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. Thank you. So we'll go straight to the panel discussion. But before we begin, I'd like to request FA Patricia. She had a dilemma. I believe she can highlight and just take us through as we launch another poll. It's good for perspective and it will also work us up for the panel discussion. So Patricia, we can share your dilemma and then we'll launch the screen. We launch the poll, sorry. So welcome, Patricia. As I said, she's the MD and founder, Revenue Stream. She's also very conversant with the ethics matter. She took us through the ethics topic during the March conference, and it was one of the best. Actually, it was the best as per the ratings, the best presentation during the March conference. We recognize you, Patricia, for that. So we'll share your dilemma, and then you can talk about it, and then we'll launch the poll.
Thank you very much, Diana. So this is coming up to you from a marketing point of view. You've currently gone into business at a time when there's COVID, and as an impact of COVID, you've had to fire 70% of your staff, and you're seriously under pressure around downscaling. During this time, you've also been working very closely with a client in terms of fundraising, and your mandate or your contract with the client has now expired, and the board is kind of in disarray. Now, more importantly, during this time, a client has come up to you, or a potential funder has come up to you and is willing to give you some money for this client. Your mandate has always been based on success, and you only earn if the client closes the deal. So as you're standing right now, you have a cash flow issue going on, you have a staffing issue going on, you do not have a contract, and your client's board is in disarray. So any renewal looks distant. The two questions are, would you go ahead and introduce the client to the investors at the risk of losing a fee? Or would you drop the conversation entirely? We look forward to seeing what your answers look like. Thanks, Diana.
So there we have it, Patricia. There are the results. Maybe you can say something about it. What did you have in mind in terms of it being an ethical dilemma? What is the right thing to do? Kevin talked about honesty, transparency, fairness. What's the last one, Kevin? You're on mute.
Sorry, yep, you've all got used to this. That must be the most common phrase in the world at the moment. Take yourself off mute. Yeah, no, honest, open, transparent, and fair. So open and transparent are very similar. But I'm glad to say, by the way, I voted for the top one.
Well, it's always easier to look at an ethical dilemma when you're not personally affected by it. So if you are literally sitting in this person's seat and wondering whether to try and keep the client on the string or for future relationship, you find at times the line gets very blurred. And that's why ethics for me is always an interesting topic, because it's really about morality and what is right and wrong. So one of the questions I asked is, if a thief broke into a house and as a result, they saved the woman who was dying from carbon monoxide, is that person still a thief, or would you consider that they saved a life? So my answer is always, you want to play the ball and not the person. The reality is you are stealing and you are a thief. You did the wrong thing. And the fact that you saved a life is not consequential. So really looking at the poll, you really have a duty of care to your client, and you have a responsibility to your client. You probably started the relationships much earlier. And therefore it's important that you continue to engage professionally. Yes, you may lose the fee in the short term, but in the longer run, it may add value to you from a brand equity perspective. But the reality of ethics, is it right, is it wrong, really starts to get clouded if you're not very careful about the people that you're engaging with. For me, the one thing that has really stuck out for me from the presentation is the thought that a banker scores 44%, or my industry scores 44% in terms of trust, and an ordinary person on the street is at 57%. That to me just immediately begs the question that no wonder there are con men out there, because an ordinary citizen already doesn't trust the financial industry or the investment industry. They would rather take advice from Facebook, from what others are doing. And that is a serious challenge to anyone who's running a business right now. Because if you think of it from a trust perspective, it means there'll be so much more effort around financial education, building of trust, trying to create, even from a professional association point of view, trying to get people to actually trust us. So the word that comes to me or that pops up in my mind is really the book that Covey writes about speed of trust, business at the speed of trust. If I trust you, we'll execute faster, my costs will go down. Clearly from a financial industry, without being too general, it's kind of saying, I don't trust you. We already have enough bureaucracy in terms of speed. So on top of that, introduce the speed of lack of trust, and it just slow down the whole process to a point where it's very costly. And it probably explains why we struggle to access the retail market as an industry. So those are my initial comments, but I am very entertained by the poll results especially, and I look forward to hearing what comes up from the rest of the conversation. Thanks, Diana.
Thanks, Patricia. Still on the same point, during Kevin's presentation, he highlighted a common disclaimer. And at this point, I'd request FFA Job to just switch on his camera because it's part of the panel. There's a common disclaimer on past performance is not an indicator of future performance, and all the other disclaimers as investment and finance professionals we have. Do you think that sells us out? Kevin, Patricia, what do you think, FFA Job, in terms of the trust issue? Or are we being honest? How are we being perceived? My understanding is the common person out there does not say anything, will not give you any disclaimers if they're selling anything to you. So what do you think? It's just a tricky question for you all.
It's a major, thank you very much, Diana, and thank you very much, Kevin and Patricia, for very, very insightful discussion on these ethical dilemmas. One of the things I may say, if I understood Diana's question properly, is that trust is at the center of all types of businesses. If it is shaken, business will start falling to pieces. However, trust is based very many times on what you hear other people talk. So take, for example, Kenya, the conmen are more trusted by more people than the genuine people is a tragedy of a sort. And if you look at our financial services industry in Kenya, you recall, for example, that every time there is a con game going on, there are millions of people getting in and get trapped into it. And every time there is an IPO, which is very honest and clear, and there is a very well-written information memorandum or prospectus, you have really struggle to tell people to put in some money. And yet, if somebody appears somewhere in Kiambu and tells people they are going to make a lot of money, a person that is not even known by no one, you'll find that they have a lot of following. And within no time, billions of shillings have been collected by the same person or the same persons. Now, somebody will have to tell me what is going on there. Because is it that they trust him? I think it's largely word of mouth and somebody hearing it. I personally have saved a lot of people whom I know who are about to put money in the wrong places. Then I ask them, how did you decide to get there? Then they say, oh, I was told by my friend. And if you ask that friend, he says he was told by another friend, and so on and so on. So numbers on the streets differ. I'm not surprised that the survey indicated 44% for the finance industry and 57% for the man on the street. But I was very curious, and maybe Kevin could tell us why the top people are people in the social services sector, nurses, doctors, educators, and so on. Why are they trusted? Maybe we require to hear that and maybe find out whether we can learn something from them as financial services people. I believe we had that kind of trust from the public. Our financial services industry with drive and boom. Kevin, do you have an idea why those people, nurses, teachers, are up there?
Yeah, I think one thing is they're not seen, are they? Generally speaking, they're not seen as for profit. You know, what they're doing is more obviously for good. I mean, I was speaking from a more UK perspective, but if you go into teaching, you're not going into that for the money. You're definitely not going in there for a financial reward. And although the top doctors and the top surgeons can earn considerable amounts of money, the general perception of doctors and nurses in particular, particularly nurses, again, that they're doing a good thing, which is back to purpose. That they're there to help you get better. They're there to help cure you and your family, at difficult times. And and if you are cured of something, you're going to be very grateful. And as well that in terms of my definition of the professional, a doctor has got to demonstrate knowledge and skills and do the right thing, and you talk about trust. They cut your body open. I mean, that's real trust. You're going to allow them to cut you open. I sometimes use a dentist. I mean, a dentist wasn't on the list, but sometimes when I'm doing a presentation, I ask everyone to imagine they're sitting in a dentist chair with their mouth open and the dentist drill is just about to go into their mouth. Now, that is the ultimate trust, isn't it? You're thinking, hopefully this man or woman, they know what they're doing. They've got my best interests at heart. They've got good modern equipment. They know how to use it. They're not going to slip and drop and the drill's going to go through the back of my neck. So I think the reason that those people, the doctors and nurses, are trusted is that we respect their purpose. And I think with financial services, somehow we have to try and help people understand that actually there is a noble purpose behind, financial services. When I said earlier on about the little video on the CMA website, money does make the world go round. Hospitals, roads, good things don't get built, without finance. So the financial services industry is really important. People in old age need money to live on, pensions, this sort of thing. So I went into banking after university because I thought that, that it was important to everybody, poor people and rich people. Everybody needed help with their money. Businesses need help with their money. The doctors and nurses wouldn't be any good if they didn't have equipment in hospitals, and they don't know how to raise the money for those. So, somehow we need to draw the link, I think, between the good and the financial services actually provides, and maybe then we'll see the see the banker rise up that league table a little bit.
Thank you very much. Maybe I could add here that my take on this is that people in those sectors are seen not to be driven by the profit motive. The question begs, therefore, is profit bad? To make profit is, and the answer is, of course, no, but is many times perceived to be driven by greed. And I think there's a challenge of communication here. I don't think that the financial services industry is communicating enough from very early ages that people who are in the money have not been fully trusted here and everywhere. But the challenge here is because they have not been transparent, they have not been open, they have not been seen to be honest. If they were seen to have integrity and people of ethical behavior, then there is a good chance that profit making would be seen as honorable. And therefore, it would change a lot of things. But because of the greed, the human greed that we all know, a lot of people who make money are seen to be not fully honest. And this has huge impact on our industry. My take, therefore, the participants, is that we require to be seen as men and women of real ethical behavior. And the chairman asked at the beginning, how do we deal with this ethical dilemma? How do we, go forward from here? And my take on this is that because there are so many dilemmas, in fact, we can go on and discuss them forever because they come every day. One of them is one way to deal with it is, as I said, always be transparent, open, talk openly, let people know what you are doing, let people understand that you are there for their good. And to do this, there must be focus on true professionalism. True professionalism must be exhibited by people in the industry. There must also be consciousness of the negative impacts of deviation. That is, in my view, very important. The players, the participants in the financial services industry must be continuously conscious of the need to be careful that they don't deviate from the path, because the negative impacts are very big. And let me say a generality that we must remain, true. We must remain, as it were, we must have fidelity, total fidelity to the tenets of ethical behavior and the best practice. In fact, my many years in the industry have shown very clearly that unless people know you as a man or woman of integrity, they will always try to question what you are doing. And allow me to give you an example of just yesterday. Yesterday, somebody I had not met for 22 years, out of nowhere called me. And he said, one of people from your farm came to me selling a product. Yes, but I told him I must call Job first before I put in my money in that product. So I asked him a very question, where did you get my number? Because we have not talked for 22 years or so. He said, the last time I met you, you were at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and we knew that you believed in doing things the right way. So I thought that if you told me it is good, it is a good product, then it must be a good product. I can tell you I struggled in my mind what to tell him. But I told him, as far as I know, it's a good product. So go ahead and invest in that product. And I can tell you that challenge kept nagging my mind even when I went home. I said, surely, I think integrity pays. That man is going to invest in a product being offered by our firm just because I've told him so. So it is very important that we appreciate that if we remain true to the tenets of professionalism, ethical behavior, and best practice in whatever we do, then we could change behavior. I mean, the way people see us, and that could change our industry. Diana?
Quite an inspiring story, FFA Job. Something to learn from you. I think we are in good hands, and we'll just go. I can see some contribution from FA Charles about the same matter of nurses, doctors, and he's saying finance sector may be communicating, but it does not create influence as compared to nurses, doctors, and professors. So it seems our finance sector not really creating influence, and I can see FA Andrew Akiumu also has some sentiments on the competitive nature, especially of capital markets, lend itself to perceptions of self-interest and selfishness rather than provision of service. So something to note as finance professionals, how can we change this? Patricia, maybe you can air your views. You have been in the capital markets industry in the past for a while. Is it true that the way the competitive nature is because of self-interest, selfishness? What's your take on these sentiments?
I'm going to combine the two responses to Charles and Andrew, which is, I believe the issue of ethics has to start from you as an individual. As long as we are domiciling this at the corporate level or expecting communication at the corporate level or the association level to be what defines trust for us, then we'll have a real problem. The reason for that is, if you look at a nurse or a doctor or a professor, while they're doing probably good, you also know the person or you're referred to them as an individual, not necessarily a member of the medical association. So there's some degree that I believe first that from a corporate point of view, and I like the example that Kevin gave, because that's really starting to make corporates hold individuals accountable. So for example, if I know I've lost an individual because of potential fraud, but yet I give a reference letter and they move to another institution and they do the same thing, all that happens is they just perfect the way to do the fraud even better. And by the time it blows up, it's really a big scandal for the industry. So there's some degree of responsibility that I want first to pass on to the individuals, that I, as Patricia, have to be held as a person who practices ethics. So for example, if I've come on this call now, it's going to be online, I face a real risk of reputation to myself. So there's a real cost to me and my immediate family. So the last thing I'd want to do is be caught in a scandal that I have to explain to my mother what exactly I was doing with other people's money. So that initially, I think there has to be, and that's why at times you wonder about the penalty and some of the fines that we have. Are they significant enough in the industry? And that's where the trust gets eroded. Because the competitive nature, now picking up what Andrew is asking. So you have a very competitive industry, but the kind of fines when you're caught at times feel like they're too low for the crime that's been committed. So what the market perception becomes is, if you steal a lot of money and you have a small penalty, then you have done good overall. So I think the degree of competitiveness, I totally agree with you. It does create that impression, but we have gone a step further as corporates to make this even worse, because we now have terms and conditions, disclaimers, and when you look at the text that we write, it does not speak in any form of English. So if you look at words like, someone just sent me words and they said things like, what does fund vintage mean to my mother? Or when you say huddle it and carry, what does that mean to the person on the street? They don't understand what you're saying. So if I speak as an individual now that I'm outside and more in the retail space, if you're going to build trust, even as a corporate, and if you're going to reduce that cost of selling, then the team that you have has to actually practice in an ethical manner for that to go down. And if that starts to change, you will find business will grow. People give money to people they trust. They don't give money to the company necessarily. So that's my initial comments on that.
Thank you very much, FA Patricia, for the great insights. I hope we are really taking notes as investment and finance professionals. I'd like to request our members or the attendees to kindly type your questions under the Q&A tab. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it, or any dilemmas, any challenges, you can type as anonymous. No, we won't mention names. We just want to help us overcome some of these ethical dilemmas that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. But in the meantime, we received a very critical question here, an ethical dilemma, and I'd like to request the panelists to answer, to all give you insights or to find ways of how to encourage this particular person. So the person was asking that at times it becomes very difficult working with government. The executive may want us to approve or recommend approval for investments which do not make any economic sense or do not add any value to the public benefit. If you reject, you are either sacked, reprimanded, or even transferred to other area where your qualification or expertise is required. What should we do? A very weighty question there. Panelists, I'll start with FA Kevin.
I'm not muted, am I? No. Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, I did this presentation years ago in Greece. And we talked about integrity, and it was to some CISI members. And at the end, one of the members came up to me and he said, really enjoyed the presentation, Kevin. It's very useful, really interesting dilemmas. And he said, but I work in the Balkans. His job took him to other parts of Europe. And he said, if you don't pay bribes in the Balkans, you don't do business. It's really simple. And we looked at one of the dilemmas that involved, inducements and bribery. And he said, the simple fact is, if I followed the code of conduct of the CISI and I didn't get involved in this, then I wouldn't do the deals and I'd lose my job. What do you think I should do? So it's a sort of similar type of question, really. And it's very difficult because I think Patricia said right at the beginning, it's quite easy to opine about ethics when it's a scenario or it's not you directly. Who am I to say that an individual faced with being asked to do something that is unethical, not in the public good, arguably, or not arguably, sounds very much like it's not in the public good, then the simple answer would be that, maybe the person tries to find another job. But, I'm an adult. I know that isn't easy. People have families to support, their lives to get on with. So, that is the classic dilemma. I mean, as I say, I would argue you try and either change things, and if you can't change things, move, do something else. And there's whistleblowing at the extreme end. I mean, I've saw that again on the CMA's website. But again, that's not the easiest thing to do. That's not an easy thing to do, to go into a formal process of whistleblowing. So, I think that is the really difficult dilemma that perhaps you just have to find another job, that you're not in that position of doing something daily that you know is wrong. But as I say, that's the courage bit, isn't it? That's the reality. That only you as an individual. I'm absolutely with Patricia. Organizations are made up of individuals, but it's very difficult to feel at the lower end of an organization to stand up to the upper end of the organization. So I think sometimes you just have to change organizations if you're in that position. That's about the best I can offer, which is a tough one. I'm going to look at Patricia or someone else now to help me out and move on.
So Kevin, I think this is a reality that one you will face eventually. I don't think it's purely a government institutional issue, but it's definitely something that will come up at any point in your career. So the first thing I always remind myself is there's always an end date to being with an employer, but I will have a life after the employer. And more specifically, if I reference to the CFA charter, is my charter depends on me as an individual and not necessarily the employer. So I get to be a charter holder because of what I do. And one of the standards that they have is very clear, is around analysis and recommendations. If depending on where you are in the structure, so let's assume you're a research analyst, it is your job to do a thorough job on terms of the analysis and to create a reasonable basis and to document it and to communicate it correctly. Now, I'm not saying walk up to your boss and say that this idea is absolutely rubbish, but you have the technical skill and the ability to present that same information using numbers. So tell the right story and give them the complete information. Depending on where you are in the structure, usually that information will be escalated further up. So if you're an analyst doing the report, do a thorough due diligence, create a reasonable basis, do not fudge the numbers. Let that report move to the next level. Your supervisor too has a duty, a fiduciary duty, to also advise the board and the government or any other client. And so I think within institutions, and that's why I said, usually within the institutions, there's a framework for doing the right thing. More often than not, when you hear such a case coming in, it may be one individual at the top level pushing the agenda and the rest do not know. So some degree of, I'm going to call it emotional intelligence, will be required the higher up you go into presenting for full consideration. The second thing I'd recommend is if really you're in that situation, is find a way to get an investment committee involved. A decision made by more than one person is less likely to affect you as an individual than the overall institution. So that would be my first immediate reactions to this, to that particular question.
Let me also throw in a word. Indeed, it's a very, very serious matter, because in a country like Kenya, where jobs are critically important to both individuals and also the people who depend on them, and we have very high dependence rate, where before you make a decision, you also think about the many people who look unto you for maybe financial support, maybe for even guidance. The issue of loss of job is so big and so important that that person is truly in difficult situation. The person who is debating whether I do the right thing and lose my job, or do the wrong thing and keep my job. At the end of the day, if you choose to keep your job, it always comes to bite you. If you are an honest person, or if it's a person who aspires to do the right things, either in your profession or elsewhere. Over the years, I have met people who have made that decision of keeping their job or keeping to what they think everyone expects, but it always comes to bite them at the end of the day. The impacts are usually dire against that person who compromises. Here we are talking, you compromise because of the situation that you are in. So to be honest, it is not easy, and I would not be judgmental against anyone, but I would ask the person, think about what will happen into the future, about your career. If you have any conscience, and many people do have a conscience, how will it be impacted by the actions that you take, just because of the convenience of others or your own convenience in terms of financial, being on the right side of the money, or being on the right side of the job, or whatever. But may I suggest here that professional institutions do have a duty. And here I'm talking about our own profession, have a duty to continue being seen to be out there supporting people who would want to make the right decisions. In fact, and I know this happened one time in this country of Kenya, when there was a lot of pressure for a certain professional body, for their members who are being expected to do their own things. But at the same time, somebody was out there in the public saying, this cannot be allowed. You know, when you hear it from somebody out there, it helps you and supports your position. So we require the professional bodies like ICIFA to be on the forefront of saying what should be done and supporting its members. Finally, and to help that person who asked the question or who brought out this important dilemma, in the government today, most government offices have something they call, this is a zero tolerance. This is a corruption-free zone. We don't tolerate blah, blah, blah. And even some have even a whole board written of what they don't tolerate. So if somebody is telling you to do the wrong thing in your organization, and that board is right before you, you could actually, as you try to explain, be looking at it. Kind of telling people, we have said this is what we should do, and I believe we should do it. And the person telling you to do the wrong thing will actually not even want to look there. And that will tell you that he's not even convinced that you should do it. So I think we should develop some muscle, some grit, if I were to put it that way. We should be strong enough to score a spade, even when it means that we lose or with their consequences against us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the great insights, our panelists. I hope the person has been encouraged how to overcome that particular ethical dilemma. I can see questions streaming in, and these are just concerns about, in general, integrity. But even before we go deep into the questions, we're talking about integrity, and then there's ethics. Maybe Kevin, could you highlight, is there a clear difference between ethics and integrity? And sometimes it's said that integrity is inborn. Can someone change? Can people learn how to be people of integrity, to uphold ethics?
Let's check on. I've been asked this before about the difference. You can look up the dictionary definitions of ethics and integrity, and broadly, the difference might be explained as that ethics is the broader topic, and integrity is what's displayed by an individual. But I sometimes think, well, it's not really the importance about the difference between those two words. I mean, they all boil down to people trying to do or wanting to do the right thing. I mean, we've just talked about the individual who's very practical dilemma. They're being caught between the difficulty of doing what their boss or what somebody else expects of them against what they know is the right thing to do. So personally, I'm not too hung up on whether they call that an ethical dilemma or an integrity dilemma. It's bottom line is about doing the right thing. And I thought in that respect, for the last answer, Patricia's point about as a CFA charter holder, the individual's responsibility, because something our old chairman who visited Kenya a few years ago, Sir Alan Yarrow, when he was chairman, he used to talk about the importance of stewardship as underpinning the code of conduct, that people in financial services were stewards of other people's assets, other people's money, other people's investments, and the responsibility they had to care for that as if it was their own, and that concept of stewardship and how that overrode individuals and even and your employers. He used to say the benefit of being in a professional body was that it forced you to consider a bit more than just your responsibility to your job. You also had a responsibility to your broader profession as a member of a professional body, and I was reminded of that when when Patricia said about the importance of living up to her CFA charter holding status. That's your job as an individual. So there is a difference. I think you can define ethics and integrity differently, but bottom line, I think they all mean doing the right thing, which is a nice simple phrase for us all to live by.
Perfectly clear, Kevin. The main thing is doing the right thing. Thanks for that clarification. I believe our members and the participants have now understood the clear difference. And ICIFA does have, I hope you're aware of the code of conduct and ethics. If not, we'll need to circulate this by tomorrow so that it's clear what are the expectations of our members in terms of ethics and the professional standards. So I'll go straight to a question here, or rather sentiments, still from F.A. Charles, and he's talking about our financial experts being promising miracles in terms of the returns or the expectations to their clients. I don't know what can you say about this FFA job since you're in the industry in terms of financial experts promising miracles? How can people be more honest when it comes to meeting the client's expectations instead of just doing it for the sake of getting money? You're muted.
Sorry for that. Kevin reminded us that is a very common word. Now, I was saying that many years ago, when I joined the industry, there was one man, and I'll give that an example, who told me the stock market then, I don't know whether it is still the case, was largely driven by greed and fear. Now, from the textbook, I knew that the stock market was read by, or driven by supply and demand, and people wanting to make a return. Now, what is the message here is that a lot of people out there, because they want to entice people to bring in investments, they will promise what is not attainable. And I can tell you, in my own experience, I've seen it being promised. You promise things that cannot be attained. And I'm happy that even, for example, the regulator is coming up with the recommendations. For example, the recommendation that fund managers should only say, give also the net position for return. Because there has been cases, for example, where you say, oh, our return is so much. And it is inclusive of so many charges. So the client doesn't really know whether the figure you are giving him is the net position or the gross position. Now, the rule require that you tell the client exactly how much he or she is likely to get from that investment. But that beside the point, it is always good to know that if you don't do it right, if you are dishonest with a client, it will be a one-off, because that the day comes where you have to reckon with a client, and the client will ask you, you promised me so much and you have delivered so much. So why, what happened? And obviously that client will run away from you. So you have to decide whether you are there for the long run or you are just there for the short run. If you want to be there for the long run, then you have to be honest. You have to be actually man or woman of integrity, which I describe as being honest, being fair, being judicious, and being upright, being a man or woman of character. You stand by your word. I don't know whether those in the capital markets will recall the saying that my word is my board. That means that what I say is what I stand for. Whether it still stands that way, as I start to be told, but that is very, very important. People must say what they mean and do what they say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, FA Job, for the clear answer. And still on to you, FFA Job. It's about, since I've seen a couple of Standard Investment Bank's reports, there's someone who's asking, this is an attendee who's a non-member, is asking, why can't we just use layman language to describe products in some of the investment reports to clients? Is it something that can be done? Perhaps it's the issue of is creating the mistrust in the industry.
Many times we see language using jargon that cannot be understood easily by the investing public out there. And this is a major challenge, is a major weakness. And as I said when I started, is that we require to be much more open in the way we communicate. We require to let people know exactly what we mean, so that when they invest out of knowledge, out of full information. It is, however, some things are, however, very difficult to explain in a language that will be understood by the common person. How some organizations deal with it is that we encourage people to ask questions, directly before they put their investment. You actually ask people, if you don't understand, ask. Don't just put in your money before you understand. Ask questions so that you can be able to, it can be explained to you. And if you're not satisfied with the person talking to you, organizations, have many people go higher to beyond the person talking to you. For example, the salespeople are very good in selling, and they will use words that look nice so that they can strike a deal. And some of these salespeople are on commission. The more business they bring, the more money they bring. My message is that if you are an investor and you are not happy with what a salesperson tells you, please go higher than that person. Get convinced before you put in your money.
Thank you for that answer, FFA Job. And we could go straight to a participant who's raised his hand. Daniel Nzioki, would you want to talk? We can allow you to briefly, in 30 seconds, ask your question. Your microphone can be switched on. Daniel, can see you raised your hand, or maybe it was done inadvertently. Okay, maybe he just raised his hand for the sake. So we can go straight to a question by Kennedy Kemei, and this one I can ask Patricia. Are there instances where we experience perceived integrity challenges? If yes, how do we address it? Because you might be ethical and espousing integrity values at a personal level, but the environment you work in smacks of compromised moral values. That is nepotism during hiring, corruption, or cooking. Either it's accounting numbers or just cooking numbers because you have been told to do so. Satafa and Patricia, maybe you can try. How can this person overcome this specific dilemma?
Well, I'm going to speak from a personal point of view on this one. I think for me, it's very clear. Compromising my own integrity is not an option. And I say that recognizing that, yes, we do live in an environment where I need to have a job and I need to earn. However, like I said, my employer is not a permanent, I have not been in a permanent and pensionable job for a very long time. So if I think forward into the time in retirement when I'm 60 or further out, and if you talk to older people, it is very clear that the quality of my life may depend very highly on the type of name that I retain at the initial point. So for me, first is to understand within that institution when all these things are happening, what processes are there. So before you go all ninja and start whistleblowing and everything else, typically it's highly unlikely that a whole institution is rotten. And in the event that the whole institution is rotten, then I would suggest very strongly that you should not be there, because that rot will cover you. I've had 1 or 2 clients who have either gone through the, anti-corruption type of investigation, where yes, you're trying to tell everyone around you are not involved, but the kind of, I want to call it intrusion into your life when the investigation is happening, when they show up, when they look through your drawers, when they look through your files, when all that is going through, you do feel like a thief. So at some point, I think that balance, we really have to make it. And I think one of the people in the comments that has come up is talking about, just as a country, the overall level of integrity and the values that we are passing on. If you're going to celebrate your cousin for doing a deal that is corrupt, then how do you draw the line in an office? If I'm going to celebrate making money that is not ethical with my family, then it starts being a very gray area all around. So for me, I think personally, I think I have decided that this is a way I want to live. Yes, I do lose business, but at the same time, after some time, you will make business because people trust that what you're saying is the right thing. I want to just make, I think there was a conversation around the dentist and that discussion of whether it's ethical or integrity, which is bigger. And I just thought to myself, I mean, it would be one thing if I came to you and I said, look, I really know you have a toothache. I'd really like to help you and I'd like to pull it out for you. Now you're clear from this webinar, there's nothing to do with dentistry in my life. As much as I've been very honest about my skill, I've said I've removed 2 of my teeth. You can tell already that I'm not a professional. I'm actually downplaying what a dentist does. So for me, it's very clear. I may be having the integrity to be honest with you about what I can do, but it's clearly the most unethical decision for me to offer you dentistry services. So for me, ethics is the all-encompassing. It brings together your competence, your professionalism, your understanding of the markets. It's bigger than just doing the right thing and complying. If it can go beyond that, then you will make a difference. But if all you're doing is tick the box compliance, then we'll have a problem. So for me, on that one, I would strongly say, such an individual, look for someone you can work with, look for a mentor, start getting yourself out of that situation. It is not worth it in the long run. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Patricia. And there's some questions here which are aligned to what I'm about to share. There seems to be a difference in our industry between a salesperson and a financial professional. I think we have all seen that the people who actually sell these products are not necessarily people who have the financial knowledge or financial skill per se, who are not even required to adhere to any kind of code of conduct. So given this fact, and given that these are the people who are going to sell the financial products, I can see that Charles Githira is bringing out an important perspective, that using of the financial terms is not a challenge. In some cases, the financial advisors, quote unquote sales advisors, are in a hurry to execute transactions. I find it interesting when opening bank accounts, banking officers highlight sections I must fill with limited room for understanding all the details. If consultancy time is created to understand client expectations, it may influence decisions. Someone else is also raising the same issue of being rushed when signing, when getting to agree. And perhaps FFA job, I believe that's what the person who called you was going through at the time, because someone just wanted to sell. They have targets, they require to meet them. So how then can we draw the line between salesperson and actual financial advisors who are professional in the industry? This one I can request all the panelists, beginning with FFA Job, then FA Patricia, then Kevin.
Thank you very much, Diana. That is a real challenge, and this is where the professional body like ICIFA, CISI and others, and the regulators coming. I'm very happy to note that over the past years, in the last few years, the regulator, for example, in the capital markets, require that client-facing personnel have certain basic qualifications, or they understand the industry. Selling financial services is not like selling some mangoes because the buyer of mangoes can be able to see the mango and be able to tell is a good mango, is rotten, or whatever. The seller of financial service is something intangible, and therefore it's absolutely important that people who go out there selling must be very well trained to understand the product they are selling, so that they can be able to respond to the questions that are raised. Or sometimes even people don't know what question to ask. So it is up to the financial salesperson, if I may use that word for lack of a better, I'm trying to combine sales and finance expertise. It's important that person explains to the investor or potential investor exactly what that entails. And that is the responsibility of the most senior people in organizations, the directors in those organizations, to ensure they have proper training for the people who go to sell financial products. However, as I said earlier on, investors themselves should never agree to be rushed. Always be convinced before you put your money, irrespective of how nice those people talk. Ask questions. If not satisfied, ask somebody else until you are satisfied.
Patricia, anything to add? I know this is an important one for you.
Yeah, I think I'll just go back to that business at the speed of trust. A lot of times so let me use the banking example that's been given. When you go into a bank to open an account, they're trying to be as efficient and to get you out of there as quickly as possible. So the likelihood you will find a young teller straight out of campus who has a target to sell and to close the transaction and not delay you at the bank. I see the recommendation is saying we should take more time to understand the client and the client needs. However, because as an industry, already the trust level is so low, your speed level is being affected. Therefore, you balance out the equation by cutting down your costs. So there's a real challenge just in the entire cycle that if we don't pull those levers in the same direction at the same time, then you will have a problem. Why do I say that? If a person can market on Facebook and is a con man and can raise funds, then you have to ask yourself, is it the cost? Is his cost profile lower than that of a licensed institution? And if so, is that what is allowing him to act with speed and thus be able to generate the trust to convince people? Because unless we break that cycle in totality, picking up one item only won't change it. So I want to use an example outside of our industry. And at times we use these words. I've been in the insurance industry for a while, and you hear words like annuity and amortization. Now, clearly, if I go to anyone and try and sell annuity, what do they hear? Nothing. The regular man on the street doesn't understand that word. And therefore, the annuity product has never picked up. However, when we change that and you say buy a pension or buy a long-term or a drawdown, people seem to relate with that. When you use the word amortization, on this call, people will understand it. But if I use the same word on an open webinar, half my clients will wonder what I'm talking about. So for me, that issue of trust really, from a corporate and individual level, has to be resolved. And that only can, if that happens, then you'll reduce a lot of the related costs, and therefore you'll be able to put your client first. But as long as you're working from the back end, you will find your costs keep increasing. And more importantly, because of competition, you will keep dropping your price. And therefore, our level of operation will keep getting worse. So for me, I feel very strongly, and I like there's a number of questions around Kenya and corruption and the level of accountability that we hold our leaders. And I feel quite strongly, I think there's a saying by Dalai Lama that if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And I believe in that small area of influence where you are, I'm not going to change the whole of Kenya. I'm half Ugandan. It will not happen. However, where I am, I want to make a difference at that point and in that place. So I'm not going to wait for the government to change, for everyone to stop being unethical, and then I follow suit. So for me, it's a personal commitment. Thank you for that, Dan.
Thanks, Patricia. Now to Kevin, closing remarks.
Yeah, well, I think it quite neatly. I'm picking up on something that when Patricia talked about her acting as a dentist and integrity, might be nice, but it isn't going to, it's no substitute as well for skills, knowledge and skills. And I had that slide right at the beginning that said that, to be a true professional, you needed the knowledge, the skills and the behavior, all combined. The sweet spot was in the middle where you combine those things, because there's plenty of examples, I think, of people with good intentions, good people, but maybe without the skills who give bad advice. I absolutely think people providing financial advice, as is the case in Kenya now, and I'm sure it'll become even more so, because in the UK a few years ago the standards were raised. When I first worked in financial services, there was a fairly casual approach. Some people were qualified, some people were just experienced, and then the regulator brought in rules saying they had to be qualified, and then in 2013 they raised the level of qualifications required by people giving even fairly basic financial advice. And I'm pretty confident that will be the same way that all markets around the world go, because it protects the consumer. And you're always going to have good salesmen. You're going to have people who are better at explaining things, but they need to know what they're doing. And also employers need to think about how they reward them. Again, my early career, it was people were too quick to say, oh, isn't this person brilliant? They've just sold 50 of these. And it wasn't long before some people realized that the person who was top of the league table was cheating. And suddenly the reward system will change. I literally joined banks when things were changing and it was becoming more sales oriented and less about traditional banking and also about selling ancillary services. And the banks where I worked learned some lessons. Wow, hang on, the most successful person isn't necessarily your best person. They could be cheating, they could be doing something wrong. So you started to do balanced appraisals for people where the salesperson was also rewarded on their compliance as well as on their sales numbers. So you started to see you couldn't just sell and make the money, make the commission. You had to do it properly. And you saw much more effort made actually to audit the quality of sales that people were making. Unfortunately, and I think this is a dilemma I'm hearing in some of the questions, it does create a lot of paperwork and a lot of legal language, which is then that challenge of explaining that to customers. But you try and remember that is there to protect the customer, and that's what it should be there for. Then I'm in favor of it. So to me, it's back to that, to knowledge, skills, and behavior. You do need all three. Any one of them without the rest of it is dangerous. So it's a bit more even than what Warren Buffett says.
Thank you, Kevin. FFA Job, closing remarks.
Now, let me go back to what Kevin has just said about knowledge, skills, and the behavior. If I were to rank them, I would put behavior first. Because the reason is very simple, is that people who hold high ethical characteristics are likely to also seek knowledge and skills so that they can serve the people honestly. So what we seem to lack, and I have given this example many times elsewhere, a lot of people in Kenya, and maybe Kevin may not know this, and the younger people, the people who served in government in the early years of Kenya's independence had little knowledge, not as much knowledge. They had few skills. Some became permanent secretaries before they were 30 years. But they did their job so well until they discovered that they could make money irregularly. So if they had held on to the commitment to do the right things, knowledge and skills would have followed almost naturally through experience, through training, and Kenya would be a completely different country. I therefore want to appeal to all players in the industry, and especially people who are listening in this webinar, to realize that if you do the right things, you'll almost likely want to be knowledgeable. You'll also want to be skillful so that you can serve your people honestly. Fortunately for this group of people, because they are members of a professional body, they have knowledge and possibly they are gaining skills. All we can do is appeal to them, even as I appeal to myself, to consider the issue of ethics and integrity in the way we do our business. Excellency comes because of ethical behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, Job. Patricia, any closing remarks?
Absolutely. I think for me, at the end of the day, and I think with COVID and being online increasingly now makes this a reality. So I will always repeat this to hold myself accountable. The best framework I think you can use, or I can use personally, is my mother said, or will my mother be proud of me? Is she proud of me today at the end of this call? I know there's several things that she's told me. She's told me things like, don't eat sugar because it's bad for your teeth. Don't speak to strangers. A lot of that is really common knowledge. But when you think about it from a profit or finance point of view, my mother never sat down and told me to own multiple homes in multiple countries or to drive a Lamborghini and many cars and have a yacht. That was never part of the brief my mother gave me. And when I look at the financial scandals and the extent of the personal greed and material acquisitions, even as you talk in Kenya about corruption, it's like there's no bounds. There's nowhere where you get to a point and you say, I have enough money, I have enough material. And as a result, we start making decisions that make the public not trust us. So for me, as I close, I really want to challenge people and say, would your mother be proud of you? Would she be proud of the decisions you're making? Or would you start rationalizing to prove to her that you're doing the right thing? So for now, I am happy to say I believe I'd make my mother proud. And for that, life is good for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, our panelists, Patricia, Job, Kevin, for the great insights, also recognizing that there are attendees who are commending you for a job well done, lots of insights, real issues for our participants to ponder on. And we have learned a lot, and we believe that we are wiser in terms of how to overcome ethical dilemmas. Once again, thank you, and I'll request, as usual, our panelists, our attendees, you can raise your hand as a show of appreciation to our panelists. Okay, you can see comments from F.A. Jonathan, F.A. Kadure, F.A. Ian. Thank you all for the encouragement to our panelists, and we believe that this is truly an important conversation for our members and even the public at large. So we have taken note, F.A. Atkinson, this is something we need to do, and we encourage also our members in terms of public or policy recommendations regarding the major investments in the country. Please always feel free, if you have a paper that you would want to share with us, you can always share with us. We are open to any policy recommendations that you may have. And our focus also is on changes to policy as ICIFA members regard to anything pertaining to the investment and finance industry, and any policy recommendations to to the government. So yes, this is something that we'll take up during this year, and we encourage our members to participate. We hope we can also launch some surveys around our policy recommendations. Thank you all once again, participants, for staying throughout a whole 2-hour session just to guarantee the 2 CPD. But I hope you were not here for the CPD, but mainly to get the information that is important in terms of ethics. And ethics indeed can be learned. There's a quote from Socrates, and I'd want to tweak, not from Socrates, I'd want to quote a quote by someone that doing the right thing is the right business. So the main quote is doing good is good business, but now we're saying doing the right thing is the right business, because it is important for us to do the right thing. So again, I want to thank you all. And in terms, I have seen a question on CSI CPD, just to mention that ICIFA recognizes up to 5 structured CPD of CSI CPD. And even unstructured we recognize dependent on the number of hours. So that's something to note. As long as you just send us the attendance confirmation, we'll recognize the participation in the CSI CPD. So thank you all once again. I want to wish you all a happy and prosperous new year. Maybe the chairman wanted to say something so that we can now close, and feel free to leave the meeting after maybe the parting shot. Chairman, do you have anything to say?
Just to join you, CEO, to congratulate the panelists, the presenter, Kevin. Indeed, where my knowledge was at the beginning, I'm sure it has changed and it will never regain its original dimension in terms of the sharing. Very appreciative to Patricia and FFA Joe. Of course, being real and quoting the real examples that they have experienced and how they dealt with the dilemmas, including the learning of what Patricia didn't mention. Will your mother be happy with what you're doing? I think that's a very, very exciting comment. So anytime you really want to do something, you ask yourself that fundamental question, will your mother celebrate in terms of what you have done? So thank you very much, members, for participating. Thank you very much, panelists. I have actually gotten a fair share of learning out of this, and I will look forward to next discussions. It can always be better. Let's all share ideas as a ICIFA family. God bless and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Our panelists, we appreciate you once again, and we look forward to seeing our attendees in our other webinars coming up from next week, and we'll have at least one every month. And don't forget to go to training.icifa.co.ke in case you want to enhance your skills in various professional areas in the investment and finance industry. So good night, and see you all next time.
Bye, everybody.